So we're going to look in more detail at that last period. We call it the preparation for the second coming. This last 400 years, sometimes we refer to it that way. Of course, again, this is history which is so well documented, even moving into the era of movies, film, and recorded pictures, and so much has been written and analysed about this history. But remember, the principle is providing a new framework, a way of analysing and understanding what is happening, recognising that there is a struggle between forces of good and evil behind all of history. It started in one family. It's now on a worldwide stage which encompasses all humankind. And really, it can't get bigger in our time. So it has to be resolved. It has to be resolved at this time of history. This conflict between good and evil manifested in all kinds of difficulties and conflicts in human society. So this is the time for very clear working out of this struggle in preparation for the coming of the Messiah, to make foundation enough, a foundation of faith and foundation of substance, that God can send the Messiah a second time, someone coming to complete the unfinished work of Jesus and work with Jesus from the spirit world to bring a conclusion to history. So we can see that this last 2,000 years is like a prolongation of history. It was made longer. Jesus came to bring the kingdom of heaven. Have we had the kingdom of heaven here over the last 2,000 years?
No.
Not here, not on earth. But Jesus himself taught. He said, pray in this way, thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. He taught this way. But somewhere we have been unable, well, historically we weren't in a position to really deal with that until the Messiah comes again. So it became a more spiritualized ideal of the kingdom of heaven, a future hope of Christianity, that when we die we will be in heaven. But God wants heaven here on earth as well. Right? This is the very kind of strong confirmation of everything that the principle is saying, especially from the first chapter, this principle of creation. And again, that's why we can concentrate on that. That's why there's a focus on that, because how do you know what to return to unless you know what that is? We talk about salvation, but being saved from what to what? What are you wanting to be saved to? What kind of, you have to think very practically, what kind of society do we want? What kind of political system, education system, what kind of legal system, what kind of culture do we want? What are we looking to see where there can be a final flowering of humanity that allows us to live peaceably together as one family under God? This is the goal. So this is preparation for the second coming, and it looks specifically at this last 400 years of the history that we covered earlier. If we think about restoration history as we've looked at it, it begins really with the difficulties in the first human family, and we identify the Cain-Abel struggle. On one side, Abel, who is destroyed, who is murdered by his elder brother Cain. And this has to be put right. This is really saying to us there's a deep, deep origin of all the struggles and conflicts between brothers, and human beings are brothers and sisters. But every fight, every war, every struggle that goes on is a manifestation that's kind of come from this original, deviated beginning and this unrighteous behavior. So there was some resolution to this, as we saw, very significant resolution to this, but on a family level. This is, we say, making the foundation of substance to allow a foundation for the Messiah to be laid on a family level. That was the unity of Jacob and Esau. The story has survived to tell us these lessons, and it also acts as a model for peace and reconciliation. So it becomes a wonderful model, actually, and Universal Peace Federation is using this and teaching this as a way to have people overcome historical resentments and be able to unite together and work together peaceably. So this is very significant, the story of Jacob and Esau. And then at the time of making the national level foundation and the Messiah coming to take it to the world level, God had prepared the world, and we see this struggle now on this kind of bigger level altogether. There's Israel in this Abel type line, right? Abel, Jacob, and the nation of Israel at the time of Jesus. And also there's the fruit of this more Cain type world through Esau. And we identify that as the Hellenic culture, the Greco-Roman culture, right? So we're in the right place for this, aren't we? We're talking about this, which is fantastic. This is a culture prepared at the time of Jesus. So if we look at the whole world, there's this small but very significant development for the internal life of human beings through the tradition of Israel and Judaism, about to be reformed by the teaching of Jesus. And then there's also surrounding it, as if that were the mind and this is the body. The body is the very great accomplishments of the worldly civilization of Greece and Rome, and the amazing legacy that it leaves civilization. But if we look at these trends, then the principle identifies the one, the Abel type trend, as Hebraism, and this of course flows through the Christian tradition as well, and this more Cain type tradition as Hellenism. These two are like brothers. Cain and Abel were brothers, not simply, as we said, good and evil. It's not a division between good and evil, so please don't think that way. One where in a relative position of goodness and can be influenced and guided by God because of their tradition of faith and their openness to that spirit. And the other, perhaps externally much more accomplished and much more impressive and a much greater culture in that sense, but open to be used or misused because Satan wants to control the world. And how is he going to do that? He's going to do it through this kind of machinery in a way, and this kind of culture which can further his goals. So there is a clash between these cultures which has to be resolved. If Cain and Abel had overcome their difficulties, as the Bible clearly indicates they should have done, if they'd overcome those difficulties, they would have been united as brothers, and God would have accepted both. He wanted to bless Cain as well as Abel, right? Understand that point, because it's very crucial to understand the need for these two to unite together. So if we follow these trends of Hebraism and Hellenism according to this kind of understanding, then Hebraism is perhaps a more internal culture. It is religious. It upholds these values of religion and faith and this kind of duty and life of piety, and that is more associated with the internal life of human beings and our values, our morals, our ethics, these kind of things. Not exclusively at all, but it's there to effect some progress in this area for humankind. Hellenism has more external. Here we see the development of science, of reason, of people's rights, concern for rights, and leading through into more humanistic values. And that's a tremendously important strand. Both of these are needed, and they need it to work in unity, right? Like mind and body, really. So the fall divided mind and body and set them at war with each other. These two strands are like that problem manifested on a worldwide stage. Do you follow me? This has to be solved. Even today, this has to be solved, and they have to unite as brothers. So Hebraism and Hellenism. Hebraism is seeking internal freedom, as is Hellenism, is seeking external freedoms, and all these come together to produce a freedom and an environment in which people are free to find and respond to the Messiah when it's time to create kingdom of heaven on earth and in the spiritual realm as well. It should come together as mind and body on a worldwide level. So, we pick up on this again. I had this slide before, right? This is the trend of the Abel type Hebraism, and on the right, the Cain type history, if you like, coming down through Hellenism. And this is the state at which it is at the time of Jesus. So Jesus, if he had been accepted, you have to think, what would he have done? what would he have done if he had been accepted? Would he just kind of sit in his hometown and teach a few people? No?
He would bless the people.
He would take his message. Probably the next most likely place he would want to reach is the heart of Rome itself. So rather than being used for some kind of ugly sport of throwing Christians to lions, maybe the Colosseum in Rome would have been a place where, I don't know how many people it holds, is it about 10,000 people or maybe even more? It's a huge arena, maybe 15,000 people. Then it could have been a place where Jesus would come to speak. What if he spoke to that crowd and stirred them to a kind of real revolution of the heart? After all, Rome was powerful, right? But why was it powerful? It was a slave culture. It relied so much on slaves to be great. So this is Cain-type thinking. It's like saying, well, we deserve all these good things, and it doesn't matter if other people have to suffer in the process. This is Cain's thinking somewhere. So we have to imagine that Jesus could have reformed that. Rome collapsed because of its internal corruption. And in many ways there was a lot of immorality there within the culture. We have to say that it was there within this Greco-Roman culture. So it had to be reformed and brought back to a kind of true godly perspective on morality and ethics. And Jesus could have done that in his lifetime. Imagine he lived till he was 80, 90 years old or something, right? In teaching, and people would have been writing, and you get all the kind of scholars of the world coming to develop this foundation and hang on to every word that was coming from God in this way. So this is developing into what we call the able-type worldview. So this is just terminology. It's a kind of paradigm which Father Moon is using all the time. He will speak this even to people who've never heard it before, right? So it's like you have to catch up. You have to think, what does this mean? But this is what it means by the able-type worldview. Or he talks sometimes about the able UN, United Nations. It kind of implies that the existing United Nations is the Cain UN, right? He doesn't say that. Maybe people will take a little bit of offense. But, those two need to unite together. That's the point. That will produce the kind of change in the world that is needed. And Hellenism then is the fruit of this Cain-type worldview and continues. These worldviews continue on in two strands. That is why on almost any issue that faces people today, any kind of issue of public debate or any moral or ethical issue, there are very often, of course, a whole range of arguments, but largely there are kind of two sides to the argument, aren't there? Two sides. One you would say is more Abel type and one is more Cain type. The Cain type tradition is more prone to resort to violence or this kind of thing. The Abel type view has its own good points and bad points, and we'll look at some of those as well. So to make a worldwide foundation for the Messiah, Abel side and Cain type side need to unite together like brothers being united. So Adam and Eve fell and then Cain killed Abel. To bring back the Messiah, which is true parents like a new Adam and Eve, the children have to unite. Cain and Abel have to unite. That's part of making the foundation to go the reverse way and allow parents to stand there. Parents can stand when these children, Cain and Abel aspects, are united together. That produces a united world. It's a kind of spiritual viewpoint, but it has absolute kind of real ramifications in actual society. Here's a tendency of the Abel type view of life. There's a tendency for Abel to be rather arrogant towards Cain. Maybe that stems from the Garden of Eden too. Maybe Abel said, well, my offering is accepted. Why isn't your offering accepted? This kind of mind, feeling that we are a little bit special or chosen, it's a danger for religious people to think this way. They think they're special. Chosen, when people say chosen, it doesn't mean special or better than others. It means actually you have responsibility. You have some kind of important responsibility on behalf of others. Maybe chosen to make sacrifices for the sake of others, actually. Yes. And to suffer sometimes for the sake of others. Not that you are somehow special, like an elite that is favored by God and will go to heaven and everybody else will go to hell. This is kind of this has come into religious thinking, but it shouldn't be there. That kind of condemnation of other people. So there's an arrogance on the side of Abel towards Cain, perhaps an overemphasis on God's responsibility. God will solve everything, that kind of line, or a disrespect for reason and for science. We don't need that. We only need the Bible. That's all we need. We don't need, and even if our ideas are contradictory, science is wrong. People who strongly believe that the world was created 6,000 years ago were then shown remains of dinosaurs. Right? And what was their response to that? They said, well, our enemies in this argument, they planted them there. They must have buried them there to try and ridicule us, right? But, truth is truth. God is the God of truth, scientific truth and religious truth. These have to come together. This is unificationism, right? This is what it's about. So the tendency of the Abel side is to put too much emphasis on life after death, and this is kind of perhaps more of a Catholic view, you could say. It's like we go through the valley of death, we go through this suffering, we have to endure this, but we will see God, we'll have a beatific vision, and we'll see heaven when we die. Too much emphasis on that without really getting to grips with this world. In the time of Martin Luther, you had Jean Calvin from France, right? There he was with a theory of double predestination, saying that it's already decided before a person is born whether they go to heaven or go to hell. What can you do in your life, right? What can you do? This kind of idea started to pervade religious thinking, overemphasis on life after death. Now, also on the Cain side, there are certain tendencies. A tendency is to have resentment towards Abel. This is Cain's original feeling. Why you and not me? Why is it so unfair? Your offering is accepted, my offering isn't accepted. Initially starts this kind of feeling of resentment, which, if left unchecked, leads to wanting to strike and hit and even kill that person, as though getting rid of that person is going to solve your problem. This is the thinking of any murderer, isn't it? It's, if I kill the person, then my problem goes away. Does it go away?
No.
It doesn't go away at all. You multiply your problem, actually, if you think that way and carry it out. So the tendency of the Cain side is to put overemphasis on human responsibility, to have a disrespect for faith and religion, therefore just ridiculing it or, saying it's not necessary, we can do everything with reason and only that. But human beings are spiritual and physical beings, right? We need both aspects of this truth harmonized in a nice balance, right, that really works well. So the tendency of the Cain-type view of life is to put too much emphasis on the material side of life. Place it, and then you get out of this line of thinking materialism, and you get communism coming out of this line of thought and development of thought, and it just puts emphasis on the physical side of life. It starts to devalue human life and starts to justify the removal of people, the elimination of people, just because they have different ideas or different viewpoints, or just because they have religious ideas or something which is different to the ruling ideas. So here we see the parallel between these periods. Preparation for the Messiah. At that time there was Hebraism manifested in the Jewish culture of the day, Hellenism manifested in the Roman culture of the day, and these two were, absolutely face to face, weren't they, right? And in a place like Jerusalem, centering on that. Roman boots were marching up and down the streets of Jerusalem, and it was under this kind of Roman authority. So, yes, they'd come together in a way which was actually ripe for being solved, for making this kind of unity at the time of Jesus. So this is God's preparation. No accident at all that these bear fruit in that day, and Jesus could have worked to unify these two views of life. In the time of preparation for the second coming, we see a revival of these strands of thought. We call it the New Hebraism or the New Hellenism. And through this period we can identify other names which identify these two strands of thought coming to some kind of maturity. So when we look at this period of 400 years, we see it's divided into three areas according to the principle. Three important stages of development, and like a formation, growth and completion stage. It's following the principal pattern. This is human history. The first period is the period of the Reformation and the Renaissance. 1517, Martin Luther, up to 1648, the Treaty of Westphalia, which ended the wars of religion in Europe. Then it embarks on another stage where it's more of intellectual conflict between religion, between ideologies, getting rid of the kings and queens of Europe and setting the foundation for this development of these two strands of thought, eventually into democracy and more materialistic ideas. This is from 1648 up until the French Revolution of 1789, a big changing point in Europe, right? Then we have finally the period of maturing of politics, economy, and ideology. Why are these maturing into a much more workable system that values people's freedom and the rights of the individual, etc.? It's because God is getting people ready for the kind of transfer or the development of the heavenly kingdom. We say Chonil-guk in Korean. Have you heard that expression?
Yeah.
Chonil-guk. It's like the nation of peace and harmony in that way. So this is the period from 1789, particularly to 1918. That's like your 400-year period, from 1517 to 1918, significantly the end of the First World War. Great changes, great developments happening, and immense tragedy happening also on European soil. So we'll look at this in the second lecture today, look at the principal analysis of the world wars. God's work through history has been to realize his original ideal and have the three blessings fulfilled, eventually by all people. So everybody can live like that, like Adam and Eve who never fell, like the Messiah who can say, the Father is in me and I am in the Father. This kind of idea, that kind of life, realizing the three blessings. So all his work has been to reach that as a final, ultimate goal. At the time that we are talking about, the beginning period of this last 400 years, we see that there's a big block to this development. Ironically, do you know what it is? The big block to this development is the church itself. It's the mentality which is entrenched in medieval society through the church at that time, and its kind of corruption and its kind of abandonment of its fundamental values in a way, going back to what Jesus was really teaching. So the medieval church makes a block here, and this has to be broken. It's broken by these two strands, both strands of thought, because it's an obstacle to God's development, kind of along the Cain-type line and along the Abel-type line. The medieval church is a big obstacle. It has to be broken, and the two lines of development, especially in the realm of thought and culture, are the Renaissance on the more Hellenistic side, the Cain-type side, and the Reformation on the Abel-type side. So this is the first period where we say Renaissance is in the position of a Cain-type view and a development of that, and the Reformation within religion in Europe is a kind of Abel-type view, taking a step forward. And these two strands we'll look at. I'm sure, this is well covered in your history, right? But remember, we're looking at the kind of structure of this, the skeleton of kind of workings behind history is revealed through the principle. So onto the points that I'm giving, you can add a lot of other understanding from your vast knowledge, I'm sure. So if we look at the Renaissance, first of all, this is, of course, a rebirth in its word, right, from the French. It's rebirth. A rebirth of what? Of Hellenism. right? This is rediscovering again these glories that were ancient Greece and Rome, and trying to, actually thinking that was an ideal time. I doubt it was an ideal time entirely, right? But somehow that was the imagination of people who rediscovered it. And a lot of this history had been lost, and it's reintroduced to Europe through, interestingly, through the Islamic world, and Islamic Christian scholars introduce it. They bring the works of Aristotle to the religious thinkers of Europe. Very interesting, isn't it? And they can revive their thought, and Christianity can take a leap forward intellectually by connecting with this root of the great philosophers of Greece, right? So it brings an intellectual renewal to Europe, and it breaks through this kind of stranglehold of the church. You remember some of the things the church was doing, like saying, of course the world is flat, and if you say the world is round, this is a heresy, right? We will not allow you to say that. Will the church develop if it has that kind of thinking? Not really, right? So, it's actually setting itself up in opposition to scientific development and rational thought. It will not produce the kingdom of heaven that way, right? It's actually a kind of arrogance entering in. The Renaissance also puts emphasis on human value, the value of the human being, based on reason and creativity. This is very necessary. It's necessary for getting ready for God's kingdom, to value these aspects of the human being, whereas medieval Christianity kind of put human beings down as really sinful creatures, right? Really sinful, miserable worms, right? Who are destined to sin their whole life. And actually, if you have faith, if you do certain things, then you might be saved later on. Well, my own kind of personal interest, you've already caught, is kind of architecture or art or this kind of thing. It kind of fascinates me. So I want to give an example of the Renaissance, but more from the point of view of art. And I hope you can follow me on this one. Because what was happening in Europe at that time? Right, just a few years prior to Martin Luther, this is the kind of painting that was being painted. Can you see that? Right? Very detailed, very beautiful craftsmanship, isn't it, right? A kind of religious subject. I think someone is having a demon cast out of them or something. Somebody with a very, leg injury and this kind of thing. The people themselves, they look rather wooden, don't they? They look a bit wooden, kind of side view, like this, Perhaps this also illustrates it's another medieval picture. You see there's no use of perspective, this kind of way of naturally showing distant objects and foreground. This wasn't really employed or discovered. Although quite beautiful, it's beautiful art, right? I'm not judging it from the point of view of art, but think how people are thinking about the world. The trees there, stylized, but they're rather floating in the air, aren't they? And see how the birds are just stuck in the trees? They're stuck there. So this is interesting kind of depiction, and this is all people could do at that time. This was how to paint. Right? And then within a few years, something happens, starting in Italy. Somebody comes along and he makes this out of a solid block of marble. Do you see the change? This is the Renaissance. This is the kind of effect that it has. This is Michelangelo's The Statue of David. What do you notice about it in particular? It's naked, right? It's a little bit different. Remember those medieval pictures, such detailed robes and everything like this? But here's an appreciation of the human form, almost idealized form. And this statue, is 5.17 meters high, carved out of a solid block of marble. So that's 17 foot to you English characters there. And this is 1504. 1504 this is made. Michelangelo had walked past this big block of marble almost every day of his life and said, someday I'm going to make something out of that, right? And this was his result. Quite extraordinary. Do you want to see a detail of that? Let me show you a detail.
Oh.
Isn't it extraordinary? This is bigger than life size, but it looks so real. It looks like it has no weight to it. You see the kind of veins under the skin. This is what people started to produce. This is the kind of breakthrough which is being made by the Renaissance. And then you get Renaissance characters such as Leonardo da Vinci. Do you remember the Mona Lisa? Yes? Anna here, she remembers very well. I think she got the arms beautifully, right? So, rather curious. Also, if you look very carefully, she doesn't have eyebrows, which is interesting. Anyway, this is also Leonardo da Vinci. A cartoon, as they say, is like a preparation for a picture. You can see that in the National Gallery in London if you go to see it. And this kind of thing, this is like a little doodle. We say a doodle, a little sketch on the side of a notebook that Leonardo makes, right? Wouldn't you be kind of envious if you really want to do that? You're just listening to a lecture and doing a little drawing. Or he just did these when he was on the telephone. This is the Renaissance, right? Michelangelo, great figures. The idea of the Renaissance man, of course, not such a division between disciplines. You could turn your hand to anything. Scientific understanding, inventions, art, poetry, writing, this kind of thing. Quite extraordinary individuals emerged. Scientific development through Copernicus. He was 1473 to 1543, an astronomer. First person in the West, I have to say that because the Chinese and the Indians have their claim on this, but saying that the heliocentric model of the solar system, the sun is in the center. The church really didn't like that, right? The church said, no, this can't be. Of course, God made the world and the world is the center, right? It must be. But people came and challenged that. So we have other characters as well. That's Leonardo da Vinci, we've already mentioned him, and of course bringing much scientific development, an amazing kind of inventor, person who anticipated a lot of other inventions that came after him. First people to really study the human body, to use bodies of deceased people and cut them open to find out how the body works and try and answer this question, this pursuit of knowledge, in order to gain even tools for helping disease and this kind of thing. So in the area of politics you have Machiavelli. In literature you have characters like Shakespeare in England, bringing a different way of thinking. Up till then, the plays which people had, dominated by the medieval church, were very rather simplistic good versus evil plays, only on a religious theme. And this was theatre, right? But Shakespeare came and changed all that. He produced complex characters that had flaws in them. They were good, but also they had something wrong. And then every kind of aspect of human nature was there, good and bad, really teasing apart what is the human mind, right? So people study it today for that reason and uphold it as something very valuable. So this is the Renaissance, right? A very potted version. That's one of the lines breaking through this stranglehold of the church. But even the church is stopping religious development. Isn't it crazy? But not really. Where would Satan like to work most?
In Rome.
I would say in the churches, in the church. The church is meant to be the able, right, institution, right, around which people can unite to make this foundation for the Messiah. If he can destroy that and make that corrupt and twist its thinking, this is already, right, ensuring its defeat. So we have the Reformation, which is breaking through in this other line. The foundations for democracy. It's democracy in the kind of religious field, really. It's starting out there, and then it spreads to the political field and other areas of society. And Luther is the key figure for that, German monk, theologian, and then church reformer. We talked about his nailing of the 95 Theses on the door of Wittenberg, right? He was also protesting against the excessive use of relics. Do you know what relics are? Sometimes, of course, an object of veneration. If a church holds the bones of a saint, it becomes a very precious place, a holy place. People want to make a pilgrimage to that. But it starts to be a whole kind of industry, really, a relic industry at the time. And the church where he was in Wittenberg was particularly notorious, right? They had, for example, little vials of milk which came from the Virgin Mary. They had straw from the manger in Jerusalem. They had, all over Europe, were pieces of the true cross. So many that you could put them all together, it would make many crosses, right? They had quite a number of foreskins of Jesus. Only one could have been right, but, certainly not that number, right? And even then, probably not, right? So, this is kind of something wrong, right? Something wrong. It's moving away from what we should be doing in terms of our attendance to God and upholding the values and the beautiful message of Jesus and bringing that to people. So he protests against it quite rightly, and others rise up also in European history. I mentioned Calvin from France, rejecting papal authority, establishing some new scheme of civil and church governance in his hometown. He chose to be married, which is a kind of break from the priestly tradition there, abandoning celibacy. Also a very devout person. Do you know he took one meal a day for a whole decade of his life as a kind of indemnity condition, right? In our language, we call it that, right? So you get the Protestant reformer Zwingli in Switzerland, a humanist scholar, really coming independently to many of the same conclusions as Luther did, and leading to significant changes in civil life in his hometown of Zurich. Now, the church, of course, reacts very strongly and violently towards these people. Many people lose their lives in these battles. They're heretics who are burnt at the stake. It's an ugly time of the wars of religion and fighting within religion itself on European soil. I'm sure somewhere we have to pay a price for that kind of mistake, right? And we should not think of ourselves just as superior. We shouldn't anyway think of ourselves as superior, but certainly with that kind of background, we have to really think even today, repentfully, about this kind of history, actually. But the church eventually realizes there are problems that need to be changed. It institutes its own, what is called counter-reformation, to put things right in the church. You have significant people like Ignatius Loyola, founder of the Jesuits. He emerges. He's famous for compiling a set of spiritual exercises, really bringing people back to this kind of essence of the spiritual life and discipline. He fought against the Protestant Reformation, but in a sense bringing a lot of those desires of the Protestants into reality through his practice. And then you have the Council of Trent, which took place, some 18 years of meetings, right? Here are all the bishops lined up. You can't quite see, but they've all got their bishop hats on here, right? All there to institute changes within the established church at the time. And removing through that many of the abuses which have been going on and allow the church to develop. So this is the breakthrough in the able type side, the Reformation. So you've got this kind of twin approach to get out of the medieval mentality and the stranglehold which the church has had. This is the first kind of struggle going on in this period. And you can sense, can't you, that all this is happening. Why? To get people ready, eventually, to meet the Messiah. This is why. Because with the state of play in that kind of ossified state, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. What would the Messiah, how would he be received if he came then, right? Things have to change. The foundation has to develop. And the second stage is this. It's called the Enlightenment, which is the development of the Cain-type view. And on the able-type side, we call it the Second Reformation. And it begins this period of conflict between religion and ideologies. So this Enlightenment is an awakening on the basis of the Renaissance to pursue truth through the development of the scientific method, largely that we use today. It's the origins of this. Science prior to this time was largely a field which they called alchemy, right? You know, alchemy, people trying to find different ways to make gold out of different substances, and kind of, it was a little bit of kind of magic in there as well, right? But not a kind of structured, ordered, scientific way of pursuing truth. And this was the development within the Enlightenment era, questioning values of certain doctrines and seeking to put more emphasis on reason, and also starting to reject religious experience as a means of knowing what is true. Right? Thinking not many of the characters who were instrumental in this weren't atheistic, or some of them were religious, but they felt we can't rely on this. If we want to find truth, we can't rely on these things. We have to have more objective ways of producing our answers. So you see the development of such people as Descartes in France, development of rationalism, French philosopher, mathematician, scientist, writer, again a little bit of a Renaissance man in that way, but searching for fundamental principles about how can we know what is true, and seeking to get that kind of unshakable knowledge, really. And you also have English philosopher, statesman, essayist, this is Francis Bacon, defending the scientific revolution with his philosophy comes to be called empiricism. You have to test out the knowledge for yourself. And making a framework here for the scientific method and the planned procedure and investigating all natural phenomena in the world. Without this, we wouldn't have the scientific development that we see. And already we said that scientific development is for making God's kingdom, right? It's for restoring this kind of more physical aspect which is needed to be in harmony with the spiritual development. So this is the Enlightenment. Also you have John Locke, English philosopher, British empiricists on this side, and scientific method. This is Isaac Newton, discovering the law of gravity and laws of motion that we still use today, and developments in optics. A kind of great mathematician, claiming to have discovered calculus. Calculus you used to struggle with at school, unless you're now a mathematician, in which case you love it. Right? And some people say it was Leibniz also involved in that, but here people of great thought making developments which are going to be so necessary for our future development in years to come, without which we would be still in kind of dark ages. So this is Newton, again a very extraordinary character. Also you get deism coming through Rousseau, so a philosopher, writer, and even composer, and leading on to influence the thinkers of the American Revolution and even French Revolution. So deism is, yes, God-believing, but in a more scientific approach. Just to summarize it very simply, it often characterized as thinking that God made this world and then retired, like somebody who had made it almost like a machine. It'll go on by itself, but there's no kind of deep personal involvement of God in our lives in that way. So yes, we acknowledge God the Creator, but also we put more faith in our scientific knowledge and understanding of how the world works. Voltaire, also in France, very much an Enlightenment thinker, and there are others. You can add people, I'm sure, from your own countries. Then that's the Cain type side development in the second stage. Are you with me? Then on the Abel type side, there's also a secondary development. Still these two strands are very separate strands, different ways of thinking, somewhere kind of antagonistic towards each other. So in the Second Reformation, furthering that kind of development towards freedom and our individual kind of relationship with God, then there's a move to emphasize truth through spiritual experience and personal religious experience, and emphasize the importance of studying and applying truth that one finds from the Bible to one's life. This is like a kind of very structured spiritual growth or spiritual path to work towards our individual maturity spiritually or perfection. And you have people who emphasize this and practice this going back to the biblical roots. The Puritans connected to those who went to America to seek freedom. The Pietists with Spener. You have also in Britain, we have John Wesley, who came and developed Methodism. Still, the Methodist Church is a very major church in Britain. And at the time of Wesley, the church was largely the kind of connected with the aristocracy, really. They had the kind of nice places in the churches, right? But he wanted to take it to the ordinary people. And he did some things which were really frowned upon. They thought, this is not good behavior, right? He received a lot of opposition. What did he suggest? He, for example, went into the fields in England and he preached to people outside. Can you imagine? He just gathered people and he preached to them. Gosh, people wanted to make laws to stop this happening, right, in the British Parliament. Surely this shouldn't happen, right? But actually, because he took it to the kind of ordinary person, he brought the religious message in a structured way, how to be methodical about your spiritual life. Actually, it removed the base of kind of future resentment amongst the working class in Britain. So there was no communist revolution in Britain, right? Why was there not? Actually, always the Communist Party was free to work. You could join the Communist Party, but they were always a kind of rather sad-looking group of people on the street corner handing out, red pamphlets all the time, right? And you kind of laugh at them a little bit, a little bit like that. But other people, it didn't catch on as an idea to kind of liberate the oppressed masses, because people had been somewhere liberated internally through this development of the Second Reformation, centering on Wesley. You have the Great Awakening in America. This is happening now through Jonathan Edwards, tremendous preacher, and out of his effort and his preaching of the gospel and going back to the kind of biblical roots, it stirred people to become missionaries. And this was a time when people started to go even around the world as missionaries, especially in the 19th century. So this is the Second Reformation. We have on the philosophical side the ideas of Kant, idealism, and Hegel, his ideas, again kind of adapted and a little bit twisted around to be used by Marx in the future, but initially part of this effort. Also in the religious area we get extraordinary characters like Swedenborg. Have you heard of Swedenborg?
Yeah.
Emanuel Swedenborg, not surprisingly from Sweden, given his name, but a Swedish scientist, philosopher, and Christian mystic. Really renowned, respected scientist. Right? But at age 53, he entered a whole spiritual phase of his life. The spirit world opened up to him, and he went on journeys into the spirit world. So he writes very complex but detailed books about what he sees there. His conversations with the angels, lists of names of angels, very scientifically organized. And people had to respect this person because they knew him as a scientist. He was not a crazy man, but he had these experiences and he wrote them down. This is the founder of, it's still, his church is there, often called the New Church, or Swedenborgianism. It's not large, but still that tradition lives on. He could visit heaven and hell freely, right? And also, interestingly, had ideas which made a critique of the idea of the Trinity that we were looking at yesterday. He had very profound experiences, and such people were, again, reviving this idea that there is a real spiritual world, and we need to know about it, we can know about it, we should know about it. And he sought to teach people this spiritual reality, because knowledge of that reality makes a difference to how we live our life on earth. If you are ignorant of that reality, you can live your life in a very materialistic way. You say, well, I've got one life, I'll just enjoy it and make sure I have a really happy experience myself and make sure everything's okay for me, and then I'll die. But if that would adversely affect your life in an eternal spiritual realm, do you still want to do it? Do you still want to live that way? People start to think, no, actually. We want to actually have an eternal life where we can have freedoms and we can enjoy a much higher level of the spiritual realm. So this is Swedenborg, right? So if we go back to this time, we see the preparation for the second coming has initially these two periods, the kind of formation stage and the growth stage. Renaissance and Reformation. Renaissance then develops through the Enlightenment, Reformation through the Second Reformation. These periods developing respectively the Cain type view of life and the Abel type view of life. How are you doing, everybody?
Yes.
Is it all right?
Yes.
Is it clear?
Yes.
Alles klar?
Alles klar. Alles gut.
Increase is
Great. Okay. If you permit me, I'll just have a little look into the next lecture. It'll give us less, material for this evening, and I'm sure you don't mind, right? Want to think a little bit more about the future developments here in this third stage, preparation for the coming of true parents or the coming of the Messiah, that of course this idea even originates, as we said, with the words of Jesus. He was the origin of this idea that the Messiah would have to come again. And he knew that. He knew that because of his deep sorrow that the things that he recognized as his responsibility to fulfill in his lifetime could not all be completed. Therefore he carried with him this kind of resentment, this kind of painful, pent-up feeling of there's so much more to do, and is looking for opportunity to work with a person at the close of the age on the foundation which is made to receive the Messiah at the second coming. Then he can have his heart released in that way, right? And he can be part of that victory. So this is the second part. We just finished here. The third area is the development along the Cain type view of life into what becomes communism. And in the Abel type life, it develops into the Western democracies that we enjoy this part of the world, right? So it's a maturing of political structure, of economy, and of ideology. The desire of the Cain view and the desire of the Abel view are for an ideal social system, right? Everybody wants happiness. Everyone without exception is struggling to gain happiness, right? Whether you're more Abel type or Cain type, people want this happiness. Therefore you see in the development of the Cain type thought, as in communism, you see a promise of an ideal world, right? That's the kind of promise, that's the attraction for young people who get fired with revolutionary vigor to go out and even sacrifice their lives for this cause, because we want to create a world where all people are equal, etc. So you see in the fruit of this kind of line of work, such countries as the People's Democratic Republic of North Korea. Is it a democratic country?
Yeah.
It must be. It's in the name, isn't it? People's Democratic Republic? It must be. Not democratic, actually. But it shows the desire is there. The desire is there. But the way to get there, that's the question. How do you get there? How do you get there? What ideology do you use? What values are you basing your ideology on? What understanding of the nature of humanity and reality are you basing that on? This is the important thing. So they're pursuing the ideal social system. What is that ideal social system? Actually, it's an ideal society, the principle says, and this is quite I think it's somewhere like a little bit of Oriental thought coming in here. It's more approach from the Chinese philosophers, etc., that it should be modeled after the ideal individual. Oh, what a simple and beautiful way to think, actually, right? So, if we think how the human body works, every part serves the whole, doesn't it? In a healthy body, nothing is working against your health. It's all in harmony. Every bit is needed, right? Every part of our body, except maybe the appendix, right? It's needed, and we might even find that that's needed as well, even though people have them cut out. I don't know, but anyway, certain things are there. But basically, the ideal society can be modeled after, according to this principal point of view, an ideal person. It should work in harmony. These different organs are like the heart, lungs, and stomach. And the cells of the body are like the individuals of society, working harmoniously under the kind of guidance of the brain and the nervous system, transmitting those ideas so that our body amazingly does what it does in a coordinated way towards one purpose. So if we have clear mind-body unity, we can achieve extraordinary things, and human beings can show extraordinary abilities and powers, but those should be natural. Those are natural powers, right? So when you see the work of kind of martial artists, right? Martial artists with real mind-body unity, they can do things which seemingly are impossible, right? You know, with one stroke of the hand, can cut the top off a glass bottle. How can you do that? It means there's some kind of energy there. There's some kind of coming together of body and spirit which allows you to do these kind of things. Anyway, this is the model of ideal society. It's preparation for the ideal world, right? Through internal means and ideology, this is effort to restore our original nature as human beings. And the external effort and preparation for the ideal world is through these things, perhaps more familiar to us through our education system, which tends to be centered on the physical and the material. It's looking at politics, economics, technology, restoring the original environment, how the Garden of Eden should be, how heavenly kingdom should be, that we can live in harmony with nature and be able to master nature through science and technology. So we see various stages of development as preparation for this ideal world. We see development in politics over this 400-year period, right? From feudalism of the Middle Ages, which is like a formation stage, through a growth stage, which is the realm of monarchy, through the time of kind of completion stage, which is the development of democracy. And it's a transition which is actually in accordance with God's will in this way, to restore the ideal and dignity to each individual and recognize the value of each individual and have people participate in the workings of the society in a harmonious way. This is politics, but in politics we see there are also two strands. So rather than the church being the obstacle as it was for the Renaissance and the Reformation, which had to break through, the stranglehold of this time in history is the monarchy. There's a Cain-type democratic revolution, and this leads to Cain-type democracy. There's also an Abel-type democratic revolution, which leads to Abel-type democracy, and we'll look at those in more detail. Secondly, external preparation for this ideal kingdom, this kind of transition into a new order for society, also comes in the area of economics. Again, from that employed in the feudalistic society to the development of capitalism, through to economic democracies that we see kind of maturing today, not without their problems, of course, right? But we're still working these things out, right? We're still struggling because essentially our values are not in the right order. We have to get our values correct, and then we can solve this kind of situation. So there we see that society moves forward in these ways, also through the development of technology. You can say there's initially the development of steam power, which allows people to organize factories and develop the kind of capitalist revolution. And then we see the development of electricity and internal combustion engine. This changes society. It changes the potential that we have, the possibilities that we have. And we can develop economically, and society can become fairer as a result. What is the third stage? The divine principle talks about atomic energy, right? So this was very popular, a new hope for mankind. It's gone through a period where it's become unpopular, but it may well revive again, especially if we can develop new ways of controlling atomic reactions, especially through fusion reactors, right? Which people are working on. If we can harness this kind of source of energy, a limitless amount of energy with no waste products and this kind of thing. Or, what will happen? What will happen given the rate of scientific development? What will be, the next developments? Maybe cars that run on water? Something like that?
Yes. It's possible.
It's possible. Already people working on that, right? Extracting hydrogen from the water. So, okay, it'll be clean, it'll be, hopefully cheap. Someone will invent a big tax to put on it, I'm sure, but anyway, right? You can be sure of that. So, this is the kind of getting ready, right? And part of this is the Industrial Revolution. This is allowing for the mass production of goods and new methods and this kind of thing, not without its kind of abuses, and because, society has to develop internally and in terms of its spiritual development. So originally a lot of people are mistreated and they're exploited and they have to work very long hours. And certainly was the case in Victorian London that children were used to go up chimneys, right? To clean chimneys. They used to send children up the chimneys to clean them and go right to the top. Isn't that horrendous, right? These dirty, sooty chimneys, because everybody burning wood and coal, right? And that was what used children for. And workhouses which had children. No kind of concept really of childhood at that time. You just, when you were old enough to do the work, you did the work. And if you were born into a poor family, you had to go to a workhouse and then work this way. So, yes, but it starts to be kind of enlightened figures come along and say, well, we not only want to make money through our ventures here and our means of mass production, we also want to provide for our workers schools for their children, better standards for men and for women, and be able to create good houses for them. Eventually, philanthropists coming along to actually create even model cities where workers could live in order to further their means and their ends, as well as those of those who control the capital and actually are reaping the benefits of that. So, secondly, we see through this the creation of a middle class in Europe, which hadn't been there before, rather than the time when there was just an aristocracy and people with sometimes an obscene amount of wealth, and those who lived very much in poverty. And that was, of course, what the French Revolution came to contest and really overturn. Thirdly, we see that such abuse leads to exploitation and colonization. So even the efforts of the growing empires in Europe are, in one hand, bringing the gospel of Jesus to every country around the world, but also at the same time, of course, taking something back home in terms of wealth and riches, and sometimes even people, the development of the slave trade. So we see kind of abuses going on at the same time as good developments. One kind of failure of Christianity during this time was to really address these abuses. And Christianity was largely for much of its time supporting the slave trade and trying to give justification to it. Something that we have to take as a kind of collective sin of Christian Europe and repent for, actually, and make some restitution for. Because, always at the heart of human society is this problem of fallen nature. It's there on the Abel type side and on the Cain type side. Susceptibility to exploit others for one's own benefit. And we need an Abel type structure that can uphold true values and allow people to see that that's a kind of guiding light that we all want to follow. And if that is there, then there's good Cain-Abel unity, there's a foundation to receive the Messiah. Brothers and sisters, I want to say thank you very much for patiently listening. We're going to take a break.